Voices for Freedom and RCR, and my background is in primary education, and I'm known for communicating complex issues clearly, as well as for fostering community, courage and personal responsibility, particularly in challenging times.
Thank you. Ms. Deeks.
My name is Claire Deeks. I'm a qualified barrister and solicitor and a registered patent attorney able to practice in New Zealand and Australia. My background is in commercial litigation with a master's in international human rights law. I'm a co-founder of Voices for Freedom and RCR, and I was living in central Auckland during the time of this consideration and now in Taranaki.
Thank you. Ms. Ashby Coppins.
I am Katie Ashby Coppins. I'm a civil litigator with over 20 years' experience. I have experience in medico-legal, employment law, human rights, commercial insurance, and also class actions. My first 10 years of my career, I was based here in New Zealand, and then the last 14 years I've been based in Australia, where I am now based. I'm Head of Legal for Voices for Freedom and have been with the organisation since August 2021.
Thank you. Now, I'm just going to explain for people watching what our commissioners know and what the three of you know, which is that Voices for Freedom have presented a paper of issues and scientific evidence to the Royal Commission and have appeared in person and have called expert witnesses to give evidence before the Commission, totalling about 5.5 hours. So the evidence today is going to traverse very briefly some of the material or some of the issues that have been discussed in that evidence, but will then turn to some questions which haven't yet been asked of these witnesses by the Commission. So beginning, perhaps we'll go along the row. Ms. Deeks, could you explain your personal circumstances in March 2020 and what developed from that?
Thank you. Yes, in March 2020, I was a mother to a young son living in central Auckland, running a health-focused business and watching the COVID response unfold like everybody else. Additionally, I was also observing from the perspective of being a barrister and solicitor with a master's degree in human rights law. I was trained to look beneath the surface, to read the fine print, and to test whether the powers were aligning with the principles. And it was almost immediately that red flags began to appear. One of my first major concerns was the COVID-19 public health response legislation, which was rushed through, as you know, in May 2020 under extreme urgency. It enabled warrantless home entry, it granted sweeping powers to the Minister of Health and the Director General of Health, and it overrode key provisions in our Bill of Rights Act. I studied the legislation carefully, outlining its constitutional risks. I wrote an open letter to the Ministry of Justice, and there were others that were critical as well, but the public really heard about it. The Ministry of Justice's own review admitted the truth that the legislation would impose, and I'm quoting, arguably the most extreme and significant limitations on New Zealanders' ability to go freely about our daily lives as has ever occurred in modern New Zealand history. And yet somehow, after pages and pages of concerns, it's still signed off as being consistent with our Bill of Rights. And that, more than anything else, made me realise that it wasn't just a health response, it was a legal and democratic crisis, and unfolding in real time with almost no scrutiny.
Thank you. Ms. Bland, your personal circumstances and route to involvement in these issues.
Thank you, yes. So I've long had an interest in government messaging and the evidence that sits behind the statements that come from government, as well as pharmaceutical behaviour, particularly conflicts of interest and historical fraud, and how clinical trials are conducted and reported. In the years just prior to COVID, I noticed a shift in how the public health events were being reported in New Zealand, particularly during the last major measles outbreak. So it was being reported in the time that hospitalisation rates were higher than expected, which was driving up a fear response in the public. So that prompted me to go digging, and I went and asked a medical officer of health from the Auckland Regional Public Health Service some questions, which included finding out that the so-called hospitalisation with measles in official New Zealand reporting simply meant that someone had been in the hospital system for 3 hours. And that was a contrast to what people would sort of normally expect, that it would be an overnight stay or longer than that. And so that sort of change in reporting was driving a narrative, and that sort of thing is gets my interest. So in 2020, when COVID emerged, I was still very curious about all of this. Like a lot of people, I didn't know what we were dealing with, and I was curious to find out more and get a deeper understanding of the situation. When everyone else was baking sourdough, I was reading the science and trying to sort of consume as much as I could. And one of the things that I came across pretty quickly was the Wuhan lab leak theory, which interestingly was immediately dismissed as a conspiracy theory by New Zealand officials and as well as the world. And that got my attention as well when sort of all the forces come on something to say it's, to shut it down. That's of interest to me. I pay attention. And the same thing happened again when we had the Team of 5 Million slogan that was given to the country in our first part of the response. It sounded warm and fuzzy, but I recognised that it was a tool for controlling behaviour. And then when the strategy shifted from 2 weeks to flatten the curve to stamp it out, that's when alarm bells rang for me, because I realised that the only way out of that was this mass uptake of a vaccine. And I could see from what had happened previous to COVID that the likelihood was that we were going to see mandates in that space.
Right. Ms. Ashby Coppins.
I wasn't with Voices for Freedom at that time. I began with Voices for Freedom in August of 2021, just before the mandate started. So I'll pass the question back.
All right, thank you. Just to jump ahead for a moment, you've both given answers about concerns about the government's COVID response. I'll start with you, Ms. Deeks. Do you agree that under human rights law, some rights can be limited by public law measures which respond to the outbreak of disease that poses a serious threat to the population?
Well, what I do agree is that if we're going to go down that path, the measure must first be effective. There must be clear, robust and transparent evidence that it actually works, not just in theory, but in real world conditions. In the case of COVID, evidence was weak and lacking. And secondly, the measure must be safe, and that means it should not cause significant harm physically, psychologically or socially. Third, if the measure is both effective and safe, then surely you would not need to mandate it. The people would choose it.
All right, thank you. Ms. Deeks, do you agree that there can be a requirement on a government sometimes, in theory, to implement a public health policy that has restrictions on people's human rights?
Are you addressing that to me?
No. I'm sorry, Ms. Bland. I'm sorry. Would you like me to repeat that?
Yes, sorry, I thought you were
No, I'm sorry. Do you agree that in theory it's part of the role of government to implement, if necessary, a public health response that has implications for people and people's individual human rights?
Yep.
It's probably a better, probably
I'll
is
take the
better for you
question.
because
Sorry
you're the
about that.
lawyer.
It was just the question was directly addressed to me, but we do agree that human rights must sometimes be balanced in time of crisis, but the balance must be lawful, it must be proportionate, and it must be time limited. And not all rights are created equal. And as I know the Human Rights Commissioner would know, some rights are inalienable. They cannot be suspended, removed or surrendered under any circumstances, and that includes the right to life and the right not to be subjected to torture or degrading treatment. Other rights, such as the right to work, assemble and move freely, while not inalienable, are still fundamental and must never be overridden lightly. So from the experts that we have gathered and presented, New Zealand's public health response was not a fair balancing exercise, but a wholesale override of multiple rights, often without clear evidence and without adequate justification. We don't consider that balancing rights can be used as a blanket justification for sweeping government powers. The core question should always remain, is the response proportionate, is it necessary, and is it based on robust evidence? And this is a test that we consider many COVID-era restrictions failed to meet.
I'm sorry, I realise the questions are moving around a little bit, but you have mentioned robust evidence. Was it your view, Ms. Bland, that there was, Ms. Deeks, that there was robust evidence of a major health crisis with the COVID-19 pandemic?
We consider that certainly at the time, back in March 2020, that there was evidence that would suggest that people should at least take a wait-and-see approach. Do you want to?
So as Voices for Freedom grew in size, well, no, I'm sorry, we'll come back first of all to, and I'm sorry, Ms. Dix, it's still you. Can you explain briefly, if you can, why and how Voices for Freedom was formed?
Well, we founded Voices for Freedom in November 2020 as a not-for-profit advocacy group because there was no coordinated nationwide effort at that time focused on providing a place where people could ask questions about the government's response, both online and to connect in person. And we focused providing Kiwis with basic fundamental rights information about free speech, medical freedom and informed choice. We pushed for New Zealand-specific health approach minus the scare tactics, health-based, not fear-based. We launched online eventually December 2020. By 2021, we were hosting weekly webinars with thousands attending online, regularly over 5,000 and in one case over 12,000 people. And by the end of 2021, we had over 100,000 email subscribers and 45,000 people in local groups. I'll just, if I may, just a few more of these statistics because it really goes to show that there was this huge vacuum in demand. People were not able to find somewhere to come where they could freely discuss these ideas. But by 2022, we delivered over 8 million flyers to homes across New Zealand, organised more than 4,000 pop-ups, events on the side of the road with over 20,000 core flutes distributed, hosted over 100 webinars. And we know at the time and through this period and to the point as to why we came to exist and grew, is that over a third of New Zealanders was opposed to the mandates, and that was part of a Horizon research polling by Stuff in February 22 that came to show that. Over 30% of New Zealanders supported the anti-mandate protest, and a separate poll by Courier Research showed that nearly 1 in 3 New Zealanders supported the mandates overall. So this is opposed to mandates overall. So, and this is over 1 million people. They're not fringe voices. And I want to make the point as well that they were nurses, doctors, pharmacists, scientists, engineers, police officers, defence personnel, teachers, parents, everyday Kiwis from every ethnicity, every income bracket, every age group, millionaires to beneficiaries. Our inbox was full of these people. They came from all walks of life. And we were able, because of this growth, to support significant legal action against the mandates, including the mRNA rollout to children. We published Suppress Science, and our advocacy helped trigger the second COVID inquiry, supporting thousands. So we didn't start as a protest movement, we started as a lifeline, but we were organised and principled and deeply engaged, and because of that, we grew to the largest grassroots advocacy movement in New Zealand.
So thinking about all of that, Ms. Ashby Coppins, the Human Rights Commissioner has said in the COVID context that advocacy must be responsible and based on reliable evidence. Do you agree that that's a statement applicable to Voices for Freedom as it developed?
Yes, absolutely and wholeheartedly. The key question is whose evidence and who just gets to decide what is reliable.
I have a question about that.
Okay.
Does Voices for Freedom say that what it made available was a balanced view of the different sides when there were issues with two sides?
What we provided in the People's Position was a balanced view. We provided evidence that we knew you would not be getting from the departments or from the government, information that has been censored. You are quite aware of the information that is in the public arena, the comments of safe and effective, but yet have you been made aware of Pfizer's own document, for example, on the adverse events post-authorisation, which showed a significant number of adverse events? I don't suspect that you would get that document from the government. So it isn't necessary the need to balance because that information's all very much in the public arena. What we wanted to do was to give you access to people and to information that you just simply wouldn't get access to because the censorship was so strong.
Just moving back from information that's been provided to the Commission of Inquiry and thinking about the information that's been provided to your members, people on your looking at your website, Do you assert that that presents a balanced view of the different or opposing evidence, or does your website feature one side of things?
The information that we provide on our website is information that people might not be able to get in the public arena. It's information that we have reviewed and considered in depth. It's not information that we hold out as experts. We reference experts that we consider have got valuable, justified arguments and positions, and we're a place for people to come to be informed and to find out their own information, because otherwise any other information, such as government messaging, is very much in a vacuum.
But to the point, obviously, seeing as most of what we were doing is critiquing what was out there, by its very nature, all of our materials would have the balance, because we would have the material that was being put forward by government or the government experts, and our critique and what we were saying.
Questions.
Our questions, yes. So people would be able to see both through our webinars.
Just for example, if you put forward an article by an academic and that article had been criticised or responded to maybe unfavourably in a medical journal, for example, would you give people the opposing arguments so they could be fully informed?
We would have. I would imagine in that situation that we probably would have covered that in our webinar, because it was interesting, and you want to kind of flush out what are the arguments against something, so that it gives you more of an opportunity to discuss whatever the thing was.
Do you accept that, and I think you do, that on a lot of the topics that you have presented expert scientific evidence, there are opposing views?
Yes.
I think that's why we put them forward.
This is why we have an inquiry.
All right. We've found ourselves in the heading that we have called learning, so we'll just keep going with those questions. Some groups have explicitly or impliedly named Voices for Freedom as being responsible for promoting misinformation or disinformation, and other groups have talked about misinformation being a barrier to overcoming vaccine hesitancy. What steps can you tell us that you take to ensure that what you're promoting is not misinformation?
We hear this claim a lot, however, rarely can anybody actually provide specific examples, and in the rare instances they do, these critiques have not held up well over the course of time. But to answer the question, we recognise our process would include our core leadership team through the period in question, has included 3 lawyers and an educator. We're accustomed to evaluating complex material, identifying credible sources and presenting evidence-based arguments. We take that very seriously, especially in a time where public trust was being eroded by not by dissenting voices, but by a shifting narrative. When we highlight the work of experts, we do it because we've closely examined their credentials, assessed their reasoning, and weighed it against other available information. I mean, that's how the critical thinking works. And I just want to point out that our team actually included an extraordinary group of professionals, including experienced lawyers, legal strategists, medical doctors, scientists, biostatisticians, epidemiologists, pharmacologists, immunologists. It goes on. We were in close contact with educators, data analysts, investigative researchers, health and safety consultants, public health advocates, psychologists, and obviously whistleblowers as well. And these were people with serious credentials, and they helped and informed all of our work. We have never maintained that we are specific experts in any of these subjects. We've always obtained and referenced those experts we've had.
And did you have a formal process, or what steps did you take when challenges were made or information was called misinformation? Did you have a process that you would follow to address those sorts of challenges?
We would always read things and discuss them as a team first, and we'd bounce them around in the background before we went public talking about anything. But we didn't really put things out there as this is our kind of position. What we often did was we asked questions. Hey, this new information has come to light, and we think it's worth asking the question about it to our authorities and to the experts that are being presented to us. And, instead of actually engaging and answering these questions that were often at odds with the messaging that was coming out from the government, we were instead, of course, attacked and censored and shut down.
Is there an example of information that you presented as new information on a topic that you subsequently realised was not valid, lacked rigour?
Well, we haven't ever needed to reverse our core positions on the science. We had a good think about it and to address these questions, and it's not because we're inflexible, it's just because we've been correct. But a lot of that is based on the fact that we have always been very methodical and deliberate about what information we have shared and platformed. We've always taken careful reading of the available data. We do have a couple of examples of where we've given different recommendations to people out there, and one of those was in the masks, where initially, because of the legislation, I read the legislation and saw that there's no requirement to obtain or carry an exemption card, which we told our people was the situation. However, people were suffering incredible abuse, being verbally abused, physically abused, and so because of that, not because of the legislation, we changed our recommendation to people that they may want to print out a card, and a lot of people ended up wearing it as a lanyard. So, that's one example. Another example was that you were allowed to exercise during COVID, and hence you could exercise whilst delivering flyers, which a lot of people like to do. But again, the abuse was such, and even the witch hunt by media, which actually positioned it that was unlawful to be walking along the streets, meant that people didn't feel safe. And we again issued a recommendation from VFF that nobody be seen delivering the flyers during these times, because you could get in trouble. So those are just examples of things that we changed, but we couldn't think of anything in relation to the science.
So just coming back to your consideration of the science, and you had people connected with VFF available to help you, is that right? Were you analysing the information that the government was making available as well, the research the government was providing?
Absolutely.
Every day.
Absolutely. And we were sending in OIAs. We were, I spent a lot of my life looking on websites like the Ministry of Health in the UK and Israel. I was in their dashboards and, looking at all the statistics and trying to sort of figure out where that sat with what we were being told here in New Zealand. So we were trying to get as much information from them as possible to try and see if we could get them to explain some of their decision making behind the statements that they were making publicly, to see if they were actually based in evidence. So, yeah.
Did you ever look for independent expert help on some of those issues?
All the time. All the time. We consulted with the team of people that we had around us, because, we didn't want to look like idiots. And so we didn't want to get things wrong publicly. So we made sure that if we were going to open our mouths on something and make a statement or question something, that we were actually correct in what we were putting forth, especially with respect to the science of it.
Is it fair to say that the people that were available to help you do that were people that shared your concerns about the issues that were arising as a result of the COVID policies?
No, we spoke with a broad cross-section, and people were writing in all the time to the government experts, as it were. Sometimes they wrote under pseudonyms to ask what they thought on certain points. So there was information coming back from a broad range, and not just the people that might more typically, be aligned on where we were heading.
So in this document that you have provided us with, I'm not sure, I haven't done a count, but would there be possibly 20 issues of science where you have analysed the evidence, you say, with the help of experts associated with your group, and the questions that you put forward are to the effect that the position the government landed on was wrong. Is that correct? Do you agree with that?
Yes.
We would say that there is clear evidence that many of the decisions that they made were contrary to the advice that they were being given. And we have proof of that via OIAs and internal memos, that kind of thing. And so that's included in that booklet there. So we're not asserting that thing without any evidence behind it. It's all evidence-based.
So you're asserting that the decisions that were made by government were different to the scientific evidence that they were receiving.
Political decisions as opposed to decisions that were based in public health.
I'm sorry, can I just try to unpack that? Is it your position that on most of these issues the government received the correct scientific advice but chose not to act on it? Is that what I'm understanding?
No, that things changed. We did see that there were times when the government was provided with advice that was correct and they did follow it, but as time went on, we observed that there was a political input into how those decisions. I mean, we can give a couple of examples. Would that be helpful?
Perhaps let's start with where you started, with the government following advice at the beginning. And do you accept that the advice given to the government was to enter the first lockdown in an elimination strategy attempt?
Pardon me?
I think I got pandemic plan. Sure. So New Zealand always had a pandemic plan. And this is something that seems to be forgotten. No one seems to be talking about it in this room. There was an influenza pandemic plan, the last one updated 2017. That was based on recommendations that were sound and evidence and had evidence-based considerations, including from the World Health Organization. That plan, pandemic plan, was discarded in favour of a brand new strategy, untested, untrialled, an elimination strategy. Now, while it might have been reasonable in the first couple of days to lock down, to get a feeling, to get a steer of what we were actually dealing with, actually how risky and how dangerous COVID was, that soon petered out and was no longer a position that could have reasonably been maintained from a public health perspective. It was maintained by a political perspective. And that's clear from early on with the Diamond Princess example. We could see a perfect evidence-based situation where we had a closed ship of people, and we could see that the infection fatality rate was not as great, similar to a bad flu season. So with that type of example, that's the response that we're suggesting, that the government had that information and chose to ignore it in favour of a political position and a brand new concept of an elimination which had never been trialled or tested before.
No, I'm sorry. I'm trying to understand, because are you saying that the advice that the government had when it decided to pursue the elimination response was in fact that was no longer appropriate?
Yes, certainly by March 2020 that was obvious, that elimination was not a necessary, suitable or viable option. It's known to have huge cataclysmic social and economic harms, and we can see that has played out.
I'm just trying to understand where at what point you say the government was receiving incorrect scientific advice.
Well, I think what I would say there is it's the advice that it was getting was from one position. That there were other academics out there who had put forward an alternative to that. COVID Plan B group was the one I'm thinking about, and they had a reasonable plan that they put forward that was focused protection. And instead of engaging in that and having a discussion about the benefits and the risks of each, what we got was a witch hunt, and they were totally attacked in the media, and they faced, members of that group have faced ongoing legal attention at work for years. And so it's less about that they had some sort of incorrect advice. It's just that it was very narrow.
And the examples that I was thinking of there, when I had mentioned that there were times that we felt that there was good advice given, for example, with the masks. Now, initially, Professor Michael Baker and Dr. Ashley Bloomfield publicly acknowledged that the masks weren't particularly useful in preventing community transmission, and that aligned with the available evidence. But then, in August 2020, the government reversed its positions, citing a change in the WHO advice, and we have previously provided you with the videos and information about that and in the people's position. But that change was not evidence-based. Another one would have been where the original advice was that children were at minimal risk from COVID-19 and did not require vaccination. But that was later abandoned, and there was, without justification, there was a clear push to vaccinate children. So those are the sorts of things that we can point to where there are times where we consider the advice given was correct.
All right.
Yeah, just to reiterate that the changes we see were not made based on compelling evidence, but rather on political pressure and global messaging. And it was politics, not science, that drove those shifts. And we believe that New Zealand has paid the price for that with a decline in public trust and coherence in public policy.
Do you dispute or accept the widely held view and published by the World Health Organization that the COVID-19 pandemic caused millions of deaths worldwide?
So before I can answer the question, I'll need to understand more about that quote. In which country? Is it all countries? For which time period? How many millions of lives was being said to be saved? I am aware, for example, that the WHO has publicly claimed that COVID-19 vaccine saved at least 14.4 million lives in 2021 alone. That claim is typically cited alongside the broad assurances that COVID-19 vaccines are safe, were subject to rigorous testing and meet internationally agreed benchmarks for safety. But during the People's Position presentation for this inquiry, specifically in relation to the requested topic of the World Health Organization, we did lead expert evidence from United Nations Assistant Secretary General Professor Ramesh Thakur and former WHO public health physician Dr. Bell. Both raised serious concerns about the integrity of the World Health Organization's processes and highlighted how its agenda has become increasingly influenced by private funding, including from vaccine alliances and manufacturers. So given this emphasis the inquiry is placed on the reliability of evidence presented by others, we would ask whether you have had the chance to scrutinise the World Health Organization's claims and on what robust, independently verified data they claim vaccines saved millions of lives, and has the potential for the conflict of interest with the WHO's funding and decision-making structure being properly considered when weighing such statements.
So you've answered my question with a question. To come back to my question, from the work that you have done, the studies that you have looked at and the experts that you have consulted, do you dispute or accept the widely held view that the COVID-19 pandemic caused millions of deaths worldwide?
It's certainly what is put out there, and that's when it's quite a complex issue, because you have the claim that COVID-19 caused a whole lot of deaths, but there are issues with reporting, and so there is the whole notion of somebody died with COVID or from COVID, and how is that being kind of swallowed into a statement like that? Because here in New Zealand we had an incident that a man died of a gunshot wound, and he ended up being, it was on TV, that he was being added to the COVID death tally because he'd been tested after the fact as having COVID. And so when you add those sorts of factors into a statement like that, you need to understand other things that are were financial incentives for hospitals around the world to report patients as COVID positive, and also to attribute deaths. They got extra funding for that. So, yes, obviously the people will have died. We don't dispute that. People die every year from the flu. It's just there's a question about how many and how that number has come to.
While we're talking about numbers and the World Health Organization, there's a figure that something like 13,000 million vaccine jabs have been issued. Is that a figure that you consider is likely to be correct?
13,000 million. Well, I mean, if they've just been administered.
And what is the question?
The question is whether that's an asserted fact that you're aware of and that you would accept as
Well, we
likely to
certainly
be correct.
accept that millions of people have been have taken this product, but we also that's where we're educating people that notwithstanding that there are also extremely high numbers of people who have experienced adverse reactions and serious injury and death.
All right, thank you. Now I've got an eye on the time. I want you to explain to commissioners, and perhaps I'll state it, and if I get it wrong, you can correct me. But there was a build-up of factors that led to Voices for Freedom being involved in organising a protest on Parliament. Can you explain the different groups of people that Voices for Freedom were involved in being present at those protests?
Yes, but I may first just explain that with the protest, it was inspired from a Canadian truckers' protest where people really provided a mobilising point for New Zealanders who felt they'd been silenced or ignored and vilified. So we didn't initiate the convoy, but with 100,000 people on our email list and thousands of people up and down the country, we were uniquely placed to mobilise grassroots support. And our local groups played a key role helping spread the word with meeting points and creating connection along the way. So when it reached Wellington, it was clear that something bigger was unfolding, but it was absolutely an organic movement. It wasn't something that was organised from the outset.
No. Yeah, definitely. And there were dozens of different groups involved in that protest, and we certainly didn't run the show. But because of our size and our structure, like Claire's explained, and the trust that people had in us because of all of the history that we had, people looked to us naturally for help. And especially after that first wave of police aggression that we saw, that was when people started to arrive en masse down there. And so we had lots of volunteers on the ground in Wellington. They were sorting out the food, organising sanitation, doing laundry, and offering support in a whole range of ways. After that particular day of violence with the police, we moved down there. We set up an office and a presence, and we helped to coordinate meetings between the groups of people that were down there to give a bit of structure and to create plans and ways of communicating with the media and our people, and also with a very strong focus on keeping it peaceful. It definitely wasn't fringe. There were people in there, teachers, nurses, parents, tradies, students, pilots sleeping in a tree. Everyday Kiwis from all walks of life were there, and they were all united in one thing. They were broken by the decisions that had been made by the government, and they were there to stop the mandates.
Were you urged to consider by anyone at any stage the public health risks in insufficient people being vaccinated?
Are you speaking to the Parliament protest or
more generally? Were you asked to balance the public health response against your position that the mandates should cease?
Well, again, I think it goes back to what the evidence and what the experts were showing about the safety, the efficacy, and most importantly, transmission.
Also,
because
we have... Oh, sorry, Queen.
No, just to the point, because that would be relevant in respect of whether it was actually whether there was efficacy as to whether you would do it, and and then to the point which seemed to be one of the main points promoted, that we had to take a jab to protect somebody else, which should, fundamentally never be something that is for why people would take a medication. But in this instant, there were huge questions around the ability of the product to stop transmission. So I think that goes to the point of, the having unvaccinated people. It's not a public health issue if the product itself isn't going to actually do what it's supposed to do.
And we have the Code of Patient Rights in New Zealand, as well as the Bill of Rights, and those include the right to freedom from discrimination, coercion, harassment, exploitation, the right to be fully informed, including an explanation of the options available and the expected risks, the side effects, the benefits and the costs, and the right to make an informed choice and to give informed consent. So I think that those were really important to the people that turned up down in Parliament, because they felt like they were being stripped of everything.
You're talking there about individual, personal human rights, and I'm asking you, to what extent did you consider the obligation of the government to provide a public health response that was proportionate?
Well, I did. We totally expected them to have a public health response that was proportionate. It's just that their public health response was not proportionate. They were promoting a vaccine that did not stop transmission, which everybody there knew. They even admitted it. And yet it was being held over people and removing their jobs, taking away their homes and destroying their livelihoods. So those two things didn't marry up. How can you have a public health response that your only ticket out of this is a vaccine that doesn't even give sterilising immunity? It doesn't stop you passing it on from person to person, and use that as a tool to destroy people's lives. Those things did not balance for us.
Right, we have moved around a little bit over the questions that I had in the paper that you've had the opportunity to see. If you consider that we've covered those matters to the extent that we can do in the time available, then I'll turn to the commissioners to see whether they have any questions for you.
Yes, thank you. Just going back to early 2020, many New Zealanders will have seen on television what was happening in China, countries like Italy and the UK, where the reporting was that many thousands of people were dying from the original COVID virus. Do you agree that that reporting happened, and do you agree that that was genuine reporting?
Do you want to? I mean, we do cover that in our booklet here, but
can I give you? Yeah.
Well, I agree that it was reported, but like I was saying before, that there were the issues surrounding the with COVID, from COVID, and each of the different countries had their own situation that had factors that needed to be weighed in that individual situation, and that has happened. People have done that, and we have spoken about that in the past. I mean, gosh, it was nearly 5 years ago now that we were talking about all of this stuff. But
do you seriously expect the people of New Zealand to accept that the deaths that were being reported internationally were not genuinely from COVID?
Well, we're not disputing that there are not people. We've answered that question, that there were deaths. We're simply saying that it gets very complex, especially when people are being funded in order to tick a box to say that a death was COVID, caused by COVID, rather than, and I did hear you speak previously with Linda about causation and so forth. So we're simply saying that a lot of these are with rather than from.
You seem to be avoiding the question of whether there were in fact many thousands of people who died from COVID in that early period. Now, I'm putting it to you as straightforwardly as I can. Do you dispute that?
No doubt there were, as there are every year with flus and things like that, and yes, it might have been a particularly bad instance of that, we're not disputing that. We're not saying that there's some great conspiracy and none of these people died. That's not what we're saying. We were just saying that there are factors that need to be looked at.
The manner of which they classified the deaths. But I think all of that, you can look forward and say, there is that being reported, as you say, at that point in time. And then you're going forward all the way to the end of 2021, where Auckland is in over 100 days of lockdown. So we're saying that things needed to be continually examined and looked at, and that's why we're not here we didn't form Voices for Freedom because we were locked down for 1 week in March 2020. You know, that's not how all of this evolved. It's because of the continuing disproportionate approach.
So all I'm asking you about at the moment is the initial approach, and the question that follows from that is, do you accept that government had a responsibility in the circumstances that were being reported from overseas to protect the public of New Zealand?
Well,
we have admitted that.
Yeah,
I mean, we've acknowledged that.
I'm
Perhaps
just
the
asking
first.
you, it's not a question of what you've said before.
We have acknowledged it, but then we would come back to the principles of human rights law and looking at proportionality, necessity, all of those things. We would question strongly whether, right from very early on, that a correct assessment was made of the different steps that were taken, as opposed to relying on our existing pandemic plan.
Do you accept that it was open to government at that time to consider that there was a public health emergency which could dramatically affect the lives and health of New Zealanders?
Well, it was obviously open to them to consider that, yes.
Well then, if that is the case, surely it follows that government taking a precautionary response at that time was a legitimate act of government.
There's just the point at which it
I'm
passes that boundary.
I'm talking about at the outset. Just answer that question directly, please.
Well, I'd need to know exactly what response you're talking about. Like, initially when they would call a lockdown, we weren't told how long that was going to be for. We didn't know all of the other things that were piled in with that COVID health response legislation. So
let me put it to you clearly as I can. Do you accept that it was open to government to close the borders while an assessment was being made of what was going to happen in the future?
Yeah, well, we can accept that, but the different questions that you've posed just now, they're not all lined up with what we are being asked to accept, because first, did the government, now you've mentioned closing the borders, but before it may have been, is that what it's all about, the closing the borders?
Well, that's the question I've asked you, and I just need a straight answer. Do you accept that it was open to government to close the borders to protect the health and safety of New Zealanders at that time?
Certainly, I think it was. We were needing to assess the dangers and the risk of COVID and to see what was happening around the world. We are very lucky to be on a moat, or surrounded by a moat. So shutting the borders wasn't unreasonable for us to properly assess the dangers of COVID. It was when that danger became clear, or we got a better understanding of it, that we were able to, or a more proportional approach should have been adopted.
Now, you've expressed the view that you've never claimed to be experts, but you do rely on some expert advice, which you've referred to in your presentation, your written submission. Have you cross-checked the advice that you've been given to ensure that that's soundly based on science?
Well, obviously, yes, but at the same time, we're not epidemiologists or vaccinologists or immunologists or any of the experts that we have consulted with, so we wouldn't be in a position to review to that level the advice that we receive from experts. But those experts critique the opposing experts, and that's then we provide that information to people, and people can make up their own minds when they see different views, different debate and discussion amongst experts. So I wouldn't, be making judgment calls.
But if somebody if somebody appeared making a specific claim, we would look around for others to see if there were others agreeing with that claim or critiquing it, and we would pay attention to that, yes.
One of the experts that you've relied upon in your submissions is a doctor from Texas who has said that vaccines have never saved any lives. Is that correct?
You would have to say who that expert is.
Yeah. Are
And
you
vaccines
referring
in
to
general?
Dr. McCullough? No, he was talking about COVID-19 vaccine.
Yes, talking about COVID-19 vaccines. I'm sorry, I should have made that clear. So do you accept that position on his behalf?
I would be wanting to know the context of which he was speaking when he made that comment. Like, what were the other words around that?
You presented a video to us in which he made that assertion.
Yeah, he said that in front of the US Senate. And I believe he is primarily referencing that in respect of the fact that in the balance of everything being weighed up, they haven't saved any lives because more lives have been lost. That's how I understood his
As a consequence.
as a consequence of the vaccine. But I can see that could require some further clarification.
The pandemic plan for flu that you mentioned earlier was abandoned. Do you say that should have been maintained and we should have followed that pandemic plan despite the fact that we're dealing with a new virus that is completely different from influenza?
Yep. Why?
Yeah, I think it should have been followed. It was evidence-based. It was focused on being able to manage a pandemic and whether or not it was influenza or the novel coronavirus. It's an airborne virus that meant that the evidence-based analysis, restrictions and health responses that were analysed, reviewed, trialled and tested under the pandemic plan could have been applied. Yes, if they needed to be adjusted as a consequence of things altering, then yes, they do that. But they do that, again, based on evidence and not political decisions or a global pressure.
You were asked about the World Health Organization. I've read a report from the World Health Organization that says that there were over 700 million cases of COVID throughout the world during the main pandemic, and that 7 million deaths plus were caused by the COVID virus. Do you accept that, or say that that's a made-up story?
That's what
I would have to read the report myself. I mean, that's something that we try and do with anything that's presented to us. Is that it would not be wise to just take a short statement and give a yes or no answer, because we want to look at what is the evidence that they used to come up with that statement. Could we look at some of the statistics that informed it, that kind of thing, and that's what we've tried to do all along. So I don't want to be sort of evasive in not answering that. It's just that I would need to have a look at the detail.
Our general position, to speak generally to that, would be that there has been what's called a case-demic, people being tested, because you were saying it was the cases, and on the basis of one test or another, like the PCR test, being said to have COVID. And that's to the first part of your question and the statistics. And the second part we've mentioned already, but that goes to dying from COVID or dying with COVID, which again obviously relates back to being tested. And as Alia did mention, just in point, the guy from West Auckland who was shot with a gunshot wound, and that is one of our COVID deaths.
But Mr. Illingworth, we'd be more than happy to receive that paper and take that question on notice and respond in full.
Sure. Just my final issue before we close off this session. Voices for Freedom, do you have a relationship with the radio station, Reality Check Radio.
Yes, absolutely.
It's our media outlet of our organisation that we created in response to essentially being censored.
Do you take responsibility for what's on the Reality Check Radio website?
In terms of the content that is published?
Yes.
Yes, we do. And what I would say there is that we often publish things that we personally disagree with because it's a free speech platform.
And do you personally disagree with the attacks on people like Ashley Bloomfield, Jacinda Ardern, and others that appear on that website currently?
Do we disagree with them or agree with them?
Do you support those
We feel
publications?
that those individuals should be fully held to account. So we, at the same time, as we've mentioned, we are proponents of peaceful resistance, and so obviously to the extent that there's anything on that, we don't control comments that are made on the website, but we stand by things that are put out in our voice, and then we allow other people free speech. But we do maintain the website if threats are made and that kind of thing.
Well, on the website recently, I observed allegations of very serious bad faith on the part of former leaders of the country and people who made decisions. Do you take responsibility for those accusations of bad faith and the allegations that those people should be required to be brought to account?
Well, I will say that we are aware of and can provide evidence of, and I'm sure it's in the people's position that on multiple occasions they have acted contrary to advice they've received and in direct contrast, to information they know. So we've seen through OIAs that they know certain information. For example, Ashley Bloomfield in respect of the myocarditis risk to young men. Prime example, we can talk to that, but I know that we're short on time, but we have fully put a lot of information. That is damning information there. That is, front and centre. There was information that was known and not shared with the New Zealand public until the death of Rory Nunn.
Well, just before closing off, can I just say that your presentation to us was very comprehensively prepared, very professionally prepared and detailed, and we will be considering it very carefully. And although I've perhaps tested you a little on some issues, that doesn't mean that we have made up our minds about anything as yet. We're keeping an open mind, and we're looking very carefully at the points that you've made.
Thank you.
We appreciate that.
If I just may very quickly, because we did note that you did ask, I believe, nearly every other guest witness about what good looks like. So we would just briefly like to share what good looks like. Good looks like human rights, and in particular the right to informed consent being upheld. Never again can government be permitted to pay lip service to New Zealanders' human rights. Good looks like emergency powers never being overridden in the democratic process. A crisis does not justify sidelining Parliament or concentrating power in the hands of one or two decision makers. Robust parliamentary scrutiny and full participation must be maintained even under emergency declarations. Good looks like political accountability being enforced, politicians being held to account when they ignore available information. Repeated slogans like safe and effective, despite documented evidence to the contrary, is unacceptable. Good looks like media independence being preserved. Never again is the media to be put in a position where checkbook politics becomes so extraordinarily generous that the Fourth Estate is dissuaded from doing its core job of holding the government to account. Good looks like medical professionals being free to question the prevailing narrative. It looks like governments not using fear or psychological conditioning on their people, and it looks like an end to censorship and manipulative terms like misinformation and disinformation, which we consider should be purged from government lexicon because they are inextricably linked to propaganda. Our government must simply state, if it does not agree with a particular view, full stop. Debate and dissent are permitted activities in a democracy.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. We've run slightly over time, so we will start again at 1:10 p.m. and the first item up will be 2 more videos at 1:10.
Thank you.